This is a review of section 2.8, graphing absolute value functions. So here's a graph of the function y equals absolute value of x. And you can see it here on the left, y equals absolute value of x. So if I plug in different numbers, like x equals 0, the absolute value of x is 0. At x equals 1, the absolute value of x is 1. At x equals 2, absolute value of x is 2, so on and so forth. You get the line on the right. Then on the left side, at x equals -1, the absolute value of -1 is still 1. And then for -2, absolute value is 2, and so you get that line going on the left, and it looks like this v. And this v, this right here, y equals absolute value of x, is the parent function of all absolute value functions. And what does that mean? It means that every other absolute value function you see is going to be a variation of this function. And so right now I'm going to talk to you about some of the variations. The first variation is sometimes you'll see a function that looks like y is equal to negative absolute value of x. So there's a negative sign in front of the function. And what does that do to the graph? Well, basically, whenever you see a negative sign, all it means is the graph is flipped. So the graph will look like this graph here on the left, where it's just completely flipped over on the y-axis, and just this upside down v. So that's the first variation, very easy, y is equal to -x. But most variations you see are not going to be that easy. And so oftentimes what you'll get is you'll see functions that have absolute value in them in this format. So for example, it'll be y is equal to x minus 1 plus 3. So you get them in this format right here, which has some more numbers in it. And there's actually a formula that represents this format. And I'm going to tell you what that formula is right now. That formula is actually, I'll come down here. That formula is actually y is equal to x minus h plus b. X minus h plus k. And so this formula that represents absolute value functions is actually y is equal to the absolute value of x minus h plus k. And the h and k represent different things. So the h actually represents the change in y on the graph, or the change in x actually on the graph, and k represents the change in y on the graph. And that's going to make sense in a minute. So basically, when in this previous equation we have h is equal to 1, we have k is equal to 3. So if I write that here, h is equal to 1, k is equal to 3, that means I'm changing the center of the graph, its x value, by 1, and I'm changing its y value by 3. So what does that mean on the actual graph? Well, let's see. So here we have that graph, the main graph in blue again. And so when h is 1, that means I'm going to move the graph 1 to the right. I'm going to move the center 1 to the right over here. And k is 3, that means I'm going to move it up on the y-axis by 3. And so the new graph, the graph of this equation, now looks like this. It looks like the center has been moved up 3 and 1 to the right. And so that's what they mean in this formula by h is the change in x, k is the change in y. And it's important to notice that the formula actually says x minus 1 plus k, so you have to make sure you have the right sign. So let's do quickly an example of this. So this example says graph this function right here, y is equal to negative absolute value of x minus 1, close absolute value, minus 3. So the first thing you do here is you write down the formula for graphing an absolute value, which is y is equal to absolute value of x minus h plus k, and then you identify what the h and the k are. So here in this scenario, Here are the h and the k's. So k is easy. K is negative 3, right? You can see it's negative 3 because instead of plus k, it says minus k here, minus 3. And then h is equal to 1. So that's easy, right? It's x minus h, x minus 1, h is equal to 1. But the other thing to notice is this formula has a negative sign in front of it. So h is 1, k is 3, and there's a negative sign. And if you remember from the previous thing we talked about, negative sign means that the graph is going to be flipped. So to graph this, first we're gonna start at the center, because we know in the parent function it starts at the center. And instead of graphing at the center, we're gonna move h and k. So h is 1, that means we're gonna move the center to the right by 1, positive 1. K is negative 3, that means it's gonna go down by 3, 1, 2, 3. So the new center of our graph will be down here at the point 1, negative 3. And then because this graph is flipped, we're going to graph the graph of y equals absolute value of x upside down. So if I graph it upside down, it's going to look something like this. And there's your answer. There's the graph of y equals negative absolute value of x minus 1 minus 3.